Good morning, afternoon, or evening, whatever it is for you. My name is James, and welcome to episode 3 of the Writing with James podcast, coming to you almost live, a little too live, from my living room to talk about life, the universe, and things I didn't want to hear in the first place. My neighbors are doing a little work. Tried all morning to do this, and every time I'd sit down to start, they'd start drilling something or hammering something or something. Hadn't heard nothing from them for an hour. The second I turned the recorder on, I started hearing like sheet metal noises over there, so you may hear something in the back. Last time, it was a bit of a mess. It was intended to be about the possibility of other dimensions and stories related to that. And in preparing for it, I fell down the Skinwalker Ranch rabbit hole, and half of it ended up being about that. So it was just a strange stories podcast. And when it gets down to it, but that's the kind of thing I like to read about and hear stories about. If there's anything along those lines I like more, it's these true stories, true crime stories, and strange true stories, and things that have been confirmed as being true. All the stories last time were based on second and third party accounts and urban legends, or simply things that have no physical evidence to prove they are true. Well, I thought I would get into today are 3 strange stories that have been confirmed as true. And while some of the specific details may be based on assumption, the meat of the story is confirmed as being true. There are specific names and documented proof that these odd stories are real. And just to make it clear, these are not paranormal in nature in the sense of alternate dimensions and such, but they are just strange circumstances involving real people. I did have to make a last minute change with these stories. I had to replace one of the stories I intended to use. The day I sat down to get these ready, Mr. Ballin happened to do an entire video on the third story I was going to use. If this was something he had done a couple of years ago, I wouldn't have thought much of it, but I didn't want to come out with this so soon after he did it. But we still have 3 interesting stories we're going to get into, and I'm just going to go ahead and get into them. For the first, we have to go back more than a century to the city of Marrakesh in Morocco. One of the 4 imperial cities in Morocco. The early 1900s saw unrest in the city, and this was complicated further with dozens of women going missing beginning in 1902. And it didn't take long for the eyes of locals to start looking at a shoemaker and trader named Haj Mohammed Misfui. Now, the shoemaker already had a bad reputation with many of the locals, as it was known he had killed at least one person before and somehow escaped prosecution. Misfui worked with an older woman named Anna Rahali. And in 1906, one of the missing woman's families who knew about Misfui, or knew about his past, captured the then 70-year-old Rahali and tortured her to try and gain information. Rahali did confess that she had helped Misfui lure women to his home under the illusion of a dinner invitation. Misfui would drug the women and kill them in their sleep. And Rahali would actually later die from the torture she endured. But because of her confession, Misfui was taken into custody, and his shop was vigorously searched. And they did confirm that he was the one that murdered these women. Authorities found the remains of 26 women buried under his shop, all having been mutilated with a dagger. Another 10 were found on another property Misfui owned, all killed in the same manner. Misfui was put on trial and found guilty, being sentenced to die by crucifixion, with an execution set for May 2nd, 1906. And he was dubbed the Marrakesh Arch Killer. Misfui's case drew attention from all over Morocco, including visiting dignitaries who found the method of execution too brutal. They said you can't be crucifying someone in this day and age. And as a way to avoid tension with foreign diplomats, Misfui's execution was delayed in favor of what was apparently considered a less brutal method in Morocco in the early 20th century. I think that's debatable. As authorities decided how Misfui would be executed, he was brought out once a day to the Marrakesh market, stripped to the waist, and given 10 lashes with thorny switches as two men held his arms outstretched. And the daily lashings ended up drawing quite a crowd every day, until finally, on June 11th, 1906, Misfui's final punishment was acted out. Now, at first, it seemed like any other day leading up to the lashings. Misfui was led to the market, but instead of lashes waiting him, there was simply a hole 6 feet high and 2 feet deep that had been dug out in one of the walls. And Misfui had been sentenced to die by immurement, which is Latin, and it translates to walling in. When sentenced to immurement, the guilty party is literally walled into a small area with no exits. They're given a small amount of food and water and left there until they die of dehydration or starvation. That is apparently less brutal than a crucifixion. When realizing his fate, Misfui started struggling to get away from his captors and begged for mercy. He was placed in the hole, chained to a wall to hold him in place, and masons began securing the bricks to cover the opening. Market goers had stopped what they were doing and started pelting him with garbage. The chief jailer stepped in and gave him a minimal amount of bread and water. Once the opening was bricked up, the crowd fell silent, but then burst into cheers when they heard Misfui wailing and begging to be released. The shoemaker's wails could be heard for 2 days before he finally fell silent forever. And that actually made some locals voice their disappointment that Misfui had died too quickly. There's no information on if Misfui's remains were ever removed from the market wall, or if they are still there to this day. For our second story, we travel a little more than half a century into the future from the first. February 1965 in Chicago, Illinois. A visitor from Akron, Ohio, was attending a showcase of various sporting demonstrations, and he planted himself in one spot once he came across the archery booth. And it wasn't just the archery the man was interested in, it was the archer. The man running the booth bore a striking resemblance to an old friend of his that had gone missing years earlier. The archer wore a patch over one eye and a mustache, but otherwise he was a dead ringer for his old friend. His old friend was also an excellent archer. Now, when the bowman took a break, the man from Akron approached and asked who he was and where he was from, and the pleasant and congenial archer introduced himself as John Fritz Johnson, the sports director of a television station in Omaha, Nebraska. He was the winner of 13 archery titles in the state of Nebraska and would sometimes travel to events such as this to promote the sport. The man from Ohio told Fritz about his uncanny resemblance to his old friend Lawrence Bader, who had gone missing in May 1957, and asked if he was sure he wasn't from Akron, Ohio. And Fritz laughed and insisted no, he had never been to Akron, Ohio. And when the man persisted, Fritz went on to tell him he was originally from Massachusetts and grew up in an orphanage in Brookline. After joining the Navy in 1943 and serving until 1957, Fritz traveled a bit, and by May of 1957 was in Omaha, where he landed a job as an announcer with a radio station. That radio job led to a job offer from a local TV station doing sports, weather, commercials, and even announcing pro wrestling matches. Fritz was eventually promoted to sports director, and just last year had lost an eye to cancer, which is why he wore the eye patch. Even after hearing all this, the man from Akron was amazed at the resemblance and implored Fritz to speak to Lawrence's brothers on the phone. He said if nothing else, it might do some good for them to know that there is someone out there with such a remarkable resemblance to their brother, who was presumed dead 5 years earlier. And known for being kind-hearted, Fritz agreed to speak to the brothers if the man could wait until he did his final archery performance for the day. And the man agreed, and an hour or so later had both Richard and John Bader on a payphone with Fritz nearby, telling them that their brother Lawrence had a doppelganger in Chicago. Fritz patiently repeated his story to the brothers, also insisting he didn't know anybody from Akron, Ohio, other than the man that he had met that day. Johnson hoped telling his story would dispel any idea they might have had he could be their missing brother, but in fact it did the opposite. After hearing his voice over the phone, both Richard and John were convinced that Fritz was their brother Lawrence. When the brothers found out Fritz would be at the sports showcase another day, they immediately booked a flight to Chicago and met him face to face. That only cemented the fact that they believed this was their brother Lawrence Bader. Fritz remained as friendly as he could, but their insistence was starting to wear him a little thin. Again, he insisted his name was Fritz Johnson. He was originally from Massachusetts, and when their brother went missing in Ohio, he was already in Nebraska. There was no way he could be their brother. Finally, one of the brothers asked Fritz, could he do one more thing for them, just to ease their minds. Lawrence had his fingerprints on file, so they asked if Fritz would be willing to have his fingerprints taken and compared to their brother's. On the verge of losing his patience, Fritz said, fine, we can go to the police station and I will submit my fingerprints to them. If you care to let me know what the results are, you can reach me at KETV in Omaha, Nebraska. Just a couple of days later, Fritz was back in Omaha, not knowing that even fingerprint experts with the FBI had become involved. He received word that he was, indeed, Lawrence J. Bader, who had gone missing in Akron, Ohio on May 15, 1957. The FBI assured him the fingerprints were definitely identical. Lawrence Bader was born and raised in Akron, Ohio. Bader did indeed serve in the U.S. Navy, but entered in 1944 during World War II and was discharged in 1946. Other than his stint in the Navy, Bader lived his entire life in Akron, marrying his wife Mary Lou in 1952, and by May 15, 1957 had children ages 4, 3, and 2, with the fourth on the way. May 15, 1957 was Wednesday, and Lawrence decided to rent a boat to do a little fishing since rental rates were a little cheaper in the middle of the week. He said goodbye to his family and set out about 4:30 p.m., saying he would likely be getting home late. There had been no indication that Lawrence was unhappy or that there was any conflict with his wife. Despite some choppy water and looking like it might storm, Lawrence loaded his rented boat and headed out, and he never returned. Authorities later found the boat washed up on shore at Perkins Beach in Lakewood. The 14-foot vessel was a bit battered and out of gas, with a bent propeller on the outboard motor and scraping on the hull like it had hit a submerged rock. 2 life jackets and fishing tackle were still on board, and one oar was locked in place, but the other was gone. There was no sign of Lawrence on the boat, and after scouring the lake, no body was ever found. 3 years later, Lawrence Bader was declared legally dead. Doctors would say that Lawrence suffered from a rare form of amnesia, in which he not only didn't remember his real-life past, but he had created an entire identity that included what seemed like real memories. Some of his life in the U.S. Navy may very well have been real memories, or at least based off of them, but being an orphan from Massachusetts with a completely different name was some fabrication of his subconscious that filled in the blanks. All of it may have been complicated by the cancer that eventually took his eye. Nobody was more shocked than Fritz that he actually was Lawrence Bader from Akron, Ohio, and he never regained any of his memory from his real life. In answer to the question that Lawrence could be lying about the whole thing, the people around him said if he was lying, he was one of the greatest actors of all time. He never gave any indication that he remembered any of the people from his past when he met them, including his wife and kids. Bader himself added if he knew he was Lawrence Bader and was trying to hide it, why would he agree to submitting his fingerprints? He would be out of his mind to agree. Unfortunately, things did not go well for Lawrence from there. As Fritz, he had married in 1962 to a woman named Nancy, who had a daughter he adopted. They would later welcome a son. Nancy said little of the situation publicly, but did have their marriage annulled. Fritz lost his job at the television station, and he moved into a room at the Omaha YMCA, taking a job as a bartender. Fritz made about $100 a week, 50 of which went to help support his kids in Akron and 20 to help support his kids in Omaha. Now, of course, $100 a week in 1965 is roughly the equivalent of $970 a week in 2023. Lawrence did meet Mary Lou and his kids over a weekend in Chicago, and while he was still as kind-hearted and courteous as he was with anybody, he had no memory of ever seeing any of them before. He went on living as Fritz Johnson in Omaha, saying he thought about visiting Akron but had no desire to live there. He assumed people would constantly be prodding and testing him, trying to make him remember things, and he didn't want to live life as a freak. In May 1966, Fritz was hospitalized with stomach pains. Doctors diagnosed that he had liver cancer, and his health quickly deteriorated. On September 16, 1966, Fritz Johnson, Lawrence Bader, passed away. A memorial was held in Omaha for Fritz, but the body was returned to Akron, and Lawrence Bader was buried in the family plot at Holy Cross Cemetery. Exactly what happened to Bader after he set on that boat in May 1957 will never be known. Our third story is our replacement story. It's one you might be familiar with, but hopefully I'll have a little something in there you weren't aware of before. In the weeks following the attack on Pearl Harbor, Americans believed that an attack on the continental United States was imminent. Just 2 days after the Pearl Harbor attack, reports of approaching aircraft caused a minor panic in New York City. The reports were never substantiated, and there was never an attack on New York, but that did little to ease the tension. Things got worse when a Japanese submarine surfaced off the coast of Santa Barbara, California in February 1942, peppering an oil field and refinery with artillery shells. That attack did only minor damage and there were no casualties, but it was still the first military action on the mainland of the United States in World War II. The next day, February 24, 1942, one of the most unusual home front incidents of the war began to develop. With paranoia already high, naval intelligence instructed units off the coast of California to prepare for a potential Japanese attack. Shortly after 2 a.m. on February 25th, radar picked up what appeared to be enemy aircraft 120 miles off the coast of Los Angeles. Air raid sirens sounded and a citywide blackout was put into effect. Anti-aircraft guns were manned and the military began sweeping the sky with searchlights, looking for the approaching enemy aircraft. Just after 3 a.m., a barrage of anti-aircraft and .50 caliber machine gun fire was unleashed on an unidentified craft near Santa Monica. Before long, many other coastal defense weapons had joined in and added their firepower to whatever was in the sky. The conflict led to a famous picture being taken by the Los Angeles Times showing anti-aircraft and machine gun fire converging on something in the sky. However, the picture does not clearly show what is being fired upon. Eyewitness testimony didn't do much to clarify the situation. Some people reported seeing Japanese planes in formation, bombs falling, and paratroopers descending. Coastal artilleryman Charles Patrick would later write, "I could barely see 6 planes, but they were there all right. Shells were bursting all around them." One report even said a Japanese plane crash-landed in Hollywood. Some eyewitnesses said they saw a large balloon-like object, while still others reported they didn't see anything but smoke and the glare of anti-aircraft and machine gun fire. Colonel John Murphy later wrote, "Imagination could have easily disclosed many shapes in the sky. Cold detachment disclosed no planes of any type, friendly or enemy." After almost an hour and 1,400 rounds of ammunition were spent, an all-clear order was given. When the light of day finally came, all could agree there was no sign of an enemy attack. No downed planes, no paratroopers, no bombs. The only damage came from the coastal defense response as shrapnel came down and shattered windows. One dud careened off into a Long Beach golf course, and some homes were damaged by artillery shells. While there were no direct casualties and nobody seriously injured from the attack, it was reported that at least 5 people died from heart attacks and car accidents during the blackout. Over the next few days, conflicting reports from both the media and government officials were released. Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox called the firefight a false alarm brought on by jittery nerves, while Secretary of War Henry Stimson claimed that at least 15 planes buzzed the city, possibly nothing more than commercial planes being piloted by the enemy in hopes of striking fear in citizens. After some time, the official explanation became that it was nothing more than a weather balloon. And if that is the case, why were they releasing weather balloons off the coast of California, as there was fear of an attack? And what kind of weather balloon can take 1,400 rounds of anti-aircraft fire? It came to be known as the Battle of Los Angeles, and while it may very well have been nothing more than a mirage, it actually produced more hysteria than actual plans hatched by the Japanese directed at the mainland United States during World War II. Okay, well, hopefully, somewhere in between all the bangs and the clashes and the goings-on next door, I managed to get all of that out without too much trouble. But I hope you enjoyed those 3 stories. Is this something you would like to I mean, I'm not going to say this is what I'll do all the time, but I kind of like these stories. I kind of like these strange, true stories. And there's already a lot of podcasts out there like that, but maybe we'll just run with this for a little while. I don't know. We're still trying to figure out exactly what it is we're doing here. But I do hope you enjoyed the stories, and if you would like to check out any of the other 2 episodes of the podcast I've done so far, or anything on A View from the Middle, you can check out the YouTube channel. Of course, as you know, I've been doing some pro wrestling content. I've got some more of that coming up. As I've said before, things are really weird at work, and they're not getting any more unweird. So I have had to put a lot of time into real life lately. But hopefully I can come out with some more stuff here in the next couple of weeks. But I hope you enjoyed those stories. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Not necessarily in that order. And I will see you next time.